Hi, everybody. I'm your co-host, Stu, and I'm here with the paranormalist Patty Wilson, a veteran of over 3 decades in the paranormal field. Patty, how are you today?
I'm doing just fine. How are you, honey?
Good, good.
So, well, we missed last week, but I'm really excited to share the stories this week. We're going to talk this time about haunted mirrors. I have written some articles about it and things over the years, and I have to tell you, this is one of the subjects that people seem to get so excited about. A lot of families have a story, or people are just fascinated. You know, we take mirrors for granted today because everybody has them in their house. Every bathroom has a mirror. There's one on the wall behind me. They're just everywhere. It wasn't always that way. Mirrors were very expensive and difficult to come by, and in ancient times, only very well-to-do people had them. And from the very beginning, mirrors had a odd reputation. First of all, there was the fact that you could see your reflection in the mirror, and they became used by witches and different magicians and what have you for something called scrying, which is a way of calling up entities through the looking glass. And almost every culture has a folklore that surrounds mirrors. There's probably the superstition that we're most familiar with in this country is covering a mirror. If you see old movies or you look at old photographs, probably some of the most easily seen ones would be in the president's pictures from President Lincoln when he died. They covered the mirrors with black cloth. And there are reasons for this, and they come from ancient traditions. So it is believed that when somebody died in your home that you should cover the mirrors. Different nationalities had different traditions around it, such as if you left the mirror uncovered, it would suck up the soul of the dearly departed, suck them into the mirror, and they would be trapped in there. And we'll go down through some of the other ones, but that was mainly the reason that in the United States we would cover the mirrors. And bringing up President Lincoln should bring up another story. So President Lincoln himself had a visitation through a mirror. When he was running for the second term as president, he was back home in Illinois, and he got up one morning and was going to shave, and he saw his reflection in the mirror, but then he saw a second reflection of himself, very pale and washed out looking, and it startled him significantly. And he told his wife Mary about it, and she was really upset. She was shaken. She said that she believed that it meant that the president would win his second term but would not live to see it through. And he kind of chided her and said, "Now, mother, how do you know that?" kind of a thing. He always called her mother. And sadly, she was prophetic in interpreting that dream or that vision, because obviously he did not live through his second term. He was assassinated. But that is probably one of the more famous stories that deal with mirrors. In the Jewish culture, they have something called sitting Shiva, which is if someone dies. Are you familiar with it?
Yes.
The mirrors are covered during the in the household during the week of mourning. It's believed that demons will go into homes where there's been tragedy and loss, and they can't be seen by the naked eye, the demons, but they can be seen as a reflection in the mirror. And so you keep the mirrors covered so that the family doesn't have to deal with issues like that while they're coping with the loss of a loved one. And it's also believed in some cultures that if you would see the entity in the mirror, that this would be a magnet bringing you bad luck. In China, they believe that if you carry a corpse past a mirror, that it will suck up the spirit of that person and they'll never be at peace. So you can see why they'd want to cover the mirrors and take all the mirrors, or turn them around, do something to not allow their loved ones to have their reflections cast. In German and Dutch cultures, if you saw your reflection after a loved one has passed by that's been dead, it's an omen you're the next one to die. And I always wondered why broken mirrors were 7 years of bad luck, right?
Right. Hmm.
Well, now I know. I did a little research on it. So in ancient Roman culture, it was believed that every year the human soul regenerated, and it took 7 years for the human soul to regenerate. So the thought was that if you broke a mirror and your reflection was cast in those many shards and pieces, that it would suck up the spirit, and it would take you 7 years for your luck to change and your soul to regenerate, so that it would be yours once more.
Yikes. Yeah.
And I had no idea till I was doing some research, and I was like, oh, that makes sense to me why it would be bad luck, because it would steal your soul for 7 years.
Well, but why seven though? Because you think there'd be more than seven pieces. So that's
Well, if it was reflected into even one of those pieces, it would steal your soul for the 7 years. So your soul would go into the mirror, and it would take you that long to regenerate your soul.
hmm. No, I'll keep mine, thanks.
Yeah,
For now. Yeah.
hanging on to it pretty tight. And most people in our culture, if we have a tradition that we're introduced to, it's probably the story of Bloody Mary. That's the thing that the kids do, mostly teenage or preteen girls. They tell the story about how this entity, Bloody Mary, will come through the mirror, and you have to go into the bathroom and turn off the lights, and then you would say her name 5 times, 7 times, 3 times, depending on who's telling you the story. And then she'll come up in the mirror. And why one would do this, I don't really know, because she never does anything nice. It's not like if you call her up, she's going to grant your wishes or your hopes or anything. But it's just something to kind of test your mettle as a preteen. So I've heard some pretty crazy stories about it. And nobody really knows who Bloody Mary was. There's some speculation it was Queen Mary, that she had some very bizarre history. If you know the history of England, she was pregnant twice, or they thought she was pregnant. Her stomach swelled. She had all the outward symptoms of being pregnant, but she couldn't carry a child. And when it was time for the baby to be born, there was no baby. And eventually everything went down. A few months later, she announced again she was pregnant. She had she's swelling, and everything looked like a real pregnancy, but these were hysterical pregnancies, they believe. And during her second hysterical pregnancy, something happened and she passed away. And it's said that she might be Bloody Mary because she's searching for her lost children, and if she can't find them, she'll steal others. And then there's Mary, Queen of Scots, and then Elizabeth Bathory, who was called the Blood Countess of, and so there's a few different people it could be, but the legend of Bloody Mary seems to always be there. And I think every kid has their moments of it. And I've heard and read so many such stories throughout the years, of people who've gone into the bathroom with 2 of their girlfriends, and they're doing the Bloody Mary come to me thing, and having something actually happen where they saw a red light or they saw a face. And it was just terrifying to these people. I usually hear the stories when they're adults in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, and they confide them to me and say, I know that just sounds crazy and it's a piece of folklore, but it worked. So I've heard many such stories of that. And one of the other things I find fascinating about mirrors is I hear a lot of ghost stories. I'm the ghost lady, so I hear a lot of ghost stories. But a lot of the stories are about things reflected in mirrors that aren't there in reality. Years and years ago, I told a story about the White Lady of the Buckhorn, or excuse me,
Right.
the Wapsie. And this was a gentleman that I knew, and he had stopped way back in the 1970s. There was a bar up there, I think it was called the Whistle Stop. And he was coming home from work late one night. There was like 1 or 2 cars in front of the bar, and he thought he would just stop and get a single drink. This is, again, the 70s. This was before all that became verboten. And he had stopped at a small grocery store and picked up a gallon of milk. And he thought, well, it's cold. It's, it was a miserable day. It was a Friday night. I'm just gonna get one drink and then I'll go home. So he goes in and the bar is completely empty except for the bartender who's off in the far corner washing dishes, and this young lady who's sitting at the bar, very pretty young woman, blonde hair, white dress, just sitting there. And he walks over and he sits down on one of the bar stools and he says, good evening to her, because she's the only other person there. And she smiles at him, but she doesn't say anything. And she doesn't have a glass in front of her. And he said, what are you drinking? Would you like a drink? And she shakes her head no. And the guy comes up, the bartender, and he asks the fellow what he wants. And he says, oh, just give me a beer. And he looks at the girl and she shakes her head no again. And he's just sitting there sipping his beer. And this bartender wanders off, stalking and doing the stuff he needs to do for the night. And the girl doesn't talk. She just sits there sort of staring straight ahead. And he's kind of gotten the message that she's not in a mood to chat. So he's just being quiet, drinking his beer. And then right as he's finishing up his beer, she gets up and she turns around and walks out of the bar. He follows her by maybe 3 or 4 steps, because he had taken the time to lay $1 on the bar to pay for his beer. And he gets outside and there's still only 2 cars. Like I said, and he figures the one car must belong to the bartender, and he's kind of wondering where the girl got to, but he doesn't see her. So he gets in his car and starts down the mountain, headed towards his home. And you know how you do, you're driving, you glance from mirror to mirror and then back out the front of your car. And
Constantly.
he's doing that, all the time, right? So he does that. He's looking out the car and he looks at the side, and then he looks in his rearview mirror and she's sitting in the back seat. And she startles him because he didn't see her when he got in the car. And he's like, holy crap. And he turns around and she's not there. And he looks in the mirror again and she's still sitting there. And he turns around again and he looks and she's not there. And he looks up in the mirror and she's still there. And he's very unnerved, and he ends up, there's a lot of curves going down the waltzing. And he misses one of the curves and has an accident. Mm. And he's not badly injured, but the car's pretty messed up. And when the paramedics get there and what have you, they're, are you okay? What's going on? Was there anybody in the car? And he's like, yes, there was a girl, a young girl, a woman in a white dress. And they hunt around for quite a while, thinking she might have gotten thrown out of the car. And nobody saw her but him. And he didn't see her when he looked at her directly in the car. All he could see was the back seat. But when he would look in the mirror, she would be there.
Interesting.
And I know there's a place called Covada's Britton Lodge. They have a haunted mirror in the ladies' restroom where a figure will look out at you, and when you go over to the mirror to wash your hands, and the girls will primp a little. Mm-hmm. And this older woman will look out of the mirror at you, and you don't see your reflection at all. You only see her.
Creepy.
See, there are a lot of strange stories attached to mirrors, and they've been used in mysticism forever. And there must be something to this, because some of the stories are really unusual. One I found that I liked really well was from Veracruz, Mexico. And this is a young man by the name of Juan who tells the story. And him and his cousin were out basically shopping in whatnot shops and secondhand stores and what have you. And they came across this big old Victorian style mirror, very, ornate and huge. And his cousin just fell in love with it. And he was like, oh my gosh, this is the most beautiful thing. And he makes a deal with the guy to buy the mirror. It was, brushed silver frame and just very gorgeous. And he goes to buy it, and just as they're getting ready to leave the shop owner says to him, wait a second, I need to talk to you just a little bit. And he seems a little antsy. And he says, you need to know that you should cover that mirror at night. As soon as the sun goes down, put a blanket or a sheet or something over that mirror, okay? So just trust me on this. And he's like, yeah, right, whatever. So that afternoon, Juan and his cousin, they get the mirror home, and he helps him to hang it up in his bedroom. And Juan leaves and goes home, and his cousin's, in the house. He gets dinner. He's sitting there watching TV, and he hears this rapping sound. And he's like, somebody's at the door. So he goes to the door, and there's nobody there, and he keeps hearing it over and over again. He's walking through the house, and he's like, crap, that's coming from upstairs. It was coming from the mirror. And he pulls the sheet down off of the mirror, because he had covered the mirror like he promised.
Okay.
And there was his reflection in the mirror, but it was moving and doing things he wasn't doing. He was standing perfectly still. And chills run down his spine. He's just staring at it, can't believe what he's seeing. And the reflected self knocks on the glass surface again, and it smiles at him. And he grabbed the sheet, and he was going to cover the mirror up so he wouldn't be able to see it. And as he's reaching up to cover the mirror, the self that's reflected reaches out of the mirror and starts to pull him in. And he's screaming and he's yelling, and he's like, let go of me. Oh my God, let go of me. And this thing keeps pulling him in, as the top half of him goes into the mirror, his torso and his head, and he sees it as a reflection of his own bedroom, but everything's inverted. It's all backward. At that point, he begins to pray, and he's like, oh, Holy Father God, please help me. And as he's saying this, suddenly the reflected self lets go of him, and he falls backward out into his own bedroom. He's terrified. He goes running out of the house, down the street to a friend's house, and he's like, dude, I'm not going in that house again tonight. No, 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 no. So he calls his cousin, and his cousin comes over, and they basically all hang out at the friend's house for the night. And the next morning, they take the mirror and they smash it, and they burn it. They melt the silver. They get rid of the entire thing. They want nothing to do with it. And ever since then, everything's been okay. But he talks about how, his cousin convinced him completely that this mirror had something in it, because he said, I never saw anybody so terrified in my entire life.
Wow. I wonder if it has anything to do with the composition of how mirrors are made, because from my understanding it's solidified silver vapor that's on the backside of the glass.
Right. It could be. It definitely could be. And, reflective surfaces are a part of mysticism. They use the reflective bowls, which are reflections in water, oil, whatever. And silver is often an element used in magic and what have you. So it definitely could be.
Mm-hmm.
And to give you a couple more stories that I just found fascinating. There's one in England of these two young men who were roommates. And Soteris is the name of the one boy, and the other young man is Joseph. They're about 20 years old, going to college or sharing a flat in London. And they were taking their garbage down to the dumpster outside their apartment building. And they saw this beautiful old Victorian mirror. It's an antique mirror. It was not huge, but it was very pretty. It had a walnut border around it. And they thought it was, it would be beautiful in their apartment. So they took it out, they cleaned it up, they hung it above the radiator in their apartment. And that's when everything started to get kind of hanky. At first, they didn't connect the two things. So Soteris starts waking up in the middle of the night with these terrible shooting pains in his body, and he doesn't know what's going on. It doesn't happen every night, but it happens repeatedly. Joseph, who's usually a really happy-go-lucky person, starts to feel very tired and depressed all the time. And they just don't feel like themselves. Their love for life is just lacking. They're tired, they're cranky, they just don't feel good. So, one day, Soteris decides that he's going to paint that walnut frame to a bright silver. It would fit the mirror better, he thought. So he does. He takes the mirror off the wall, paints it silver, lets it dry, hangs it back up. And then things just get worse after that. So Joseph begins to feel those terrible sharp shooting pains again. And even though, so Terrace was already feeling them, so now Joseph is. Things start to go missing in their apartment, things like keys and books and letters that they might need to have deal with to pay bills or to answer a letter to somebody. They would just be laying on the table and then gone. And that's when Joseph starts to talk to Soteris about something he's been noticing. Joseph has been noticing that when he's alone in the house, he sees movements in the mirror, like shadows dancing down the hallway, and they're being reflected in the mirror. They just seem to shift across the glass surface. But when he goes into the hall to look, there's nothing there ever. And it's just getting worse and worse. Finally, the two young men, they stopped to talk to their landlord, and they said, hey, there was this old mirror out in the dumpster, and like we took it a few months ago, and well, we was just wondering, do you have any idea who owned that mirror? And the landlord's like, yeah, that was me. I got rid of it. I don't want anything to do with it. If you ask me, you should probably put that mirror back in the trash. That's where it belongs. Well, he wouldn't talk about it anymore, just to say to them he didn't want any part of it. After that, the nightmares began. Joseph began having horrible dreams. He was afraid to be alone in the apartment. He kept saying there was something evil in the apartment with him, that it was taking his energy, draining him of his joy. Soteris began to feel as though he were watched all the time. Eventually, Soteris would come up with this idea that it is the mirror, and that something bad had happened in front of that mirror, a murder or something like that, something very evil and negative. And he brought this up to Joseph one night, and he said, I think we need to do something with this mirror. And he tells him what he's thinking, something bad has happened in front of this mirror, and it's absorbed that negative energy. And on that night, the landline telephone mysteriously stopped working, and the radiator that was the mirror was hung above, stopped working. And that's when they decided that the mirror had to go. So they took it down and put it in a storage unit, and then they put it on eBay for sale. Somebody did buy the mirror, and they were given all the information about it, and then they were told that the mirror would be put in storage. Now, was it in storage? I don't know, but they felt that they had at least given a good warning to whoever wanted to purchase it, that there's problems with this mirror, and you're not necessarily a good idea to be having it hanging in your house.
That would make you think twice about bidding on one of those abandoned storage lockers.
It would. And going into like secondhand shops and stuff, it's like there are so many stories of hauntings that suddenly happen in people's homes when they buy something secondhand. It's not that I like secondhand shops. I mean, the desk I sit at every day I bought in a secondhand shop, but there's sometimes energy attached to this stuff, and mirrors obviously seem to have a good bit of this attached to them. So, think about it whenever you're buying stuff. Why are you suddenly so attracted to that? I can't tell you the number of ghost stories I have heard that started out with, I was walking through the secondhand shop, and all of a sudden this, vase, this mirror, this painting, whatever it is, suddenly just, caught my attention, and I knew I had to have it. And then the story begins. And I have heard many of them. And, somewhere down the line, I want to do an entire episode on haunted objects, because maybe even a couple, because there are so many of them that people have purchased throughout the years, not realizing. And utilitarian things, not just fancy things like mirrors or vases and stuff. There's one of my favorite ghost stories, even though it's a really creepy one, is about a couple in the Midwest who bought a set of bunk beds that totally changed their lives.
I remember you telling it. Did I read it that you wrote about, or you told it in the former incarnation about somebody that bought a shirt?
Actually, that happened to a friend of mine. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. He bought a purple shirt, looked like a lavender shirt.
Right. Yep.
Yes. it happened to him. I actually was there the day that the whole thing came down. That's how I know so much about it. And it was, nothing but a shirt he bought at Goodwill. But there was something about that shirt that he just changed personalities when he wore it. In fact, we videotaped him because he didn't believe us, that he would just stand and pace and rant and say, you're stupid, you're an idiot, I can't believe, and things like that. And so we videotaped him. And he's like, I don't even remember doing any of this. It totally changed his personality.
Yeah, that's the story that you told before that makes me not go to thrift stores at all. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm sorry it did that, but I mean, it was such an innocuous object. We all have done that. Bought some piece of clothing or a knickknack or something at a thrift store, at some point in time. And, it's just, you don't know what you're getting sometimes.
Sorry, that's not a mirror story, but whenever you started talking about objects, that's the first thing that went through my head. So my brain works that way. Yeah.
I have to tell you, if you find something in a garbage can, leave it there. I have to tell you, because a lot of these stories started out with my I found it in a garbage dumpster. This next story actually is the same way. So this gentleman's writing in about asking for help on a paranormal forum. And he says that his girlfriend and his sister found 2 little round mirrors that were a set, and they were in a garbage can. And they brought them home and cleaned them up, and his girlfriend hung them up in the house. She thought they were pretty. And ever since then, weird things have happened. The children who are about 3 years old, there's a set of twins, will talk to someone when there's nobody there. And when he asks them who they're talking to, they'll say the bad man. And that's all they'll tell him is, we talked to the bad man. One night, he says his girlfriend was asleep and he was getting ready for bed. He happened to glance up into the mirror and he felt as though something was following him and trying to scare him. And he began to pray and repeat a couple Bible verses. And he said that's the last thing he consciously remembers until he picks himself up off the floor. His girlfriend heard him hit the floor across the room from where he was undressing to go to bed. And he called it an out-of-body experience. He said he literally hit the floor and he felt like he was floating above himself. And when he woke up, his girlfriend was on the floor trying to, calm him down and what have you. And he says he felt like he was missing part of himself from that point forward. He thinks that some part of him got sucked into the mirror, like it was trying to pull him in spiritually. And he says, I've talked to people, I've asked ministers, and they keep telling me to just go to the mirror and tell it that I want myself back. And he's like, I don't know what to do. It's not working. And I thought that's so he's asking for help. Does anybody have any idea what I can do to make this go away? Because he just doesn't feel whole anymore. And when I was reading these and I just came across this and I thought, he's not going to make any money off of this. He doesn't even give you his name. He just like, I need help, please. And then he begins to tell the story. So one way or another, he definitely seems to believe this. And then I have one last little story. We often forget that children are fascinated with their reflections. They're fascinated with mirrors. And this is a story of a woman who passes this story on about her childhood. So she was a little girl. She said she was very vain. And she used to like to stand in front of mirrors and make faces and, twirl around, and like little girls will do. I sincerely doubt she was more vain than anybody else. But she was at her home and standing in front of the mirror when all of a sudden up behind her came a figure. When she turned around to look, there was no one there. But when she would look in the mirror, she could see this man. He would eventually, this happened almost every time she'd look in the mirrors. And she didn't like looking in the mirror anymore. He would touch her hair and touch her shoulder, and it scared her. She could feel it, but she couldn't see him unless she looked in the mirror. Eventually, her grandmother passed away, and she was at her grandmother's house. Her mom and her aunts and uncles were like shutting the house down, that sort of thing. And she looked in the mirror and she saw her grandmother. And she said, my grandma was on oxygen whenever I was little. I don't remember her without it. But in the mirror, she was healthy and she didn't have the oxygen thing on. And the man came up behind her and her grandmother stepped in front of him. And she no longer had that experience of seeing that man in the mirror. It was as though her grandma was there to protect her now.
That's a good grandmother would. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, she should, definitely. And there's one last story. This one actually took place partly in Pennsylvania, and that's why I wanted to kind of end on it. For those who don't know, Stu and I both live in Pennsylvania, so I tend to be sensitive to Pennsylvania stories. So there's a gentleman by the name of Greg Newkirk, and he runs a traveling paranormal and occult museum. He travels all across the country with his wife, and he has this great big display, and you can tour through it. A few years ago, he was contacted by a woman at the museum, and she wanted to bring him a small black glass mirror. She said that her mother had purchased it at a psychic expo years earlier, and that she had always hated this mirror. After her mother had bought it, her mother just became a very different person, very cool, very withdrawn, very subdued, whereas she had been a very hands-on and an outgoing, friendly woman before that. And when she finally pinned her mom about it, her mother said that it was the mirror. The mirror was taking her energy. And the girl didn't know if she believed the story or not, but what she did believe is that her mother believed it. So she took the mirror away from her mother and she stuck it in a storage locker, you know, because she felt that this mirror was doing something to her mother's mental health. And so she just tucked it away. And that's whenever she heard about Greg and his traveling show. She wanted to know if when he came through the area, he could take the mirror and get rid of it. She didn't want anything more to do with it. And I have to tell you, I'm friends with John Zaffis, and he has the haunted, possessed objects, and things just show up. People just contact you out of the blue. So this sounded very plausible to me. And he said, he got the mirror and he didn't see anything exciting about it. So he sort of tucked it into the displays, and he doesn't tell you exactly what's going on with every object, and he deliberately didn't say anything about the mirror. In fact, he didn't think the mirror was really haunted. He said, he didn't have any experiences, his wife didn't have any experiences, but he just chucked it onto the display, took it out, and he was in Pennsylvania, pulled over to do a couple days where people could tour the museum. And he said there was a woman who came in and she went over and picked up the little black glass mirror, and she gazed at a reflection. Within seconds, he noticed that she turned very pale. She put the mirror down, and there was he had like black cloth that he has the stuff displayed on, and she slid the mirror under the black cloth as though she just didn't even want to look at the mirror itself. So he walked over and he said to her, "Oh, I saw you were enjoying the mirror." And she's like, No, I wasn't enjoying the mirror. And she's really rattled. And he's like, "Well, is everything okay?" And she starts to cry, and she said she saw her own corpse in the mirror's reflection, not herself, but as a dead woman, and that she needed to get out of there. And she was really rattled. She said, "I'm going to my church to pray. I don't want to ever deal with the paranormal again." So this was his first clue there might be something to the story. So over the course of time, he just left the little glass mirror out. Didn't put anything on there saying haunted black glass mirror or anything. And some people would pick it up and they would, "Oh, so what's the story behind this mirror?" And they wouldn't have any problems with it. But others would pick it up and put it down very quickly. And on more than one occasion, he would ask them what was going on, why they put the mirror down. Some would tell him, "I don't want to talk about it." But there were other people who would say that they saw herself as a corpse, or they saw himself as a corpse in the mirror, reflected. And so he heard the story, all over the place, and he didn't give them any frame of reference to know why the mirror was there. It could have been haunted in 100 different ways, but they all came up with the same answer. Those who were willing to talk, they would see themselves as a corpse in the mirror, and it very much rattled them. Well, he still has the mirror, and he still has it on display. And if you happen to see him coming to your town and you want to take a look at it, you certainly can. But do remember that it's not a pleasant thing to see. And maybe you'll see it as well. So keep your eye out for the Traveling Museum of the Paranormal and the Occult and Greg Newkirk.
That was a good way to end an episode.
Thank you. It's a fascinating story, and I can see why you take it on and think, well, yeah, maybe the person's just imagining things, or their mother made it up, or whatever. And you'll just wait and see it out. In Gettysburg, there's at the Farnsworth House, there's actually a mirror that was haunted. It wasn't the mirror itself that was haunted; it was the frame. It was traced back to a murderer, and he seemed to have stayed attached to the mirror frame. There's all kinds of really interesting stories about mirrors. So if anybody that is listening has a mirror story, they can reach out to us and share it if they would. And we're definitely going to be talking about some more mirror stories in the future.
Okay, and if you'd like to do just that, I mean, you can send us an email at paranormalist@theparanormalistpodcast.com. You can look at one of our Facebook pages, and you could leave a comment there. You can, if you're watching this on video, you can leave a comment in the video. Please like and subscribe. We'd always appreciate that too, if you would. But yeah, we'd love to hear your feedback, and especially if you have mirror stories in general.
Yes, and I actually have to tell you, I got a couple comments about people liking our stories about invisible friends the other week as well. So we'll probably visit that topic again. Definitely possessed objects and a few other things along the journey. So everybody, I wish you a wonderful evening, and be careful what gets reflected in your mirror.